part of humanity is now ready to go deeper and is no longer totally hypnotized or seduced by the surface reality. So you go, thinking subsides, and all that's left is an alive presence, which has enormous depth to it. That means the little entity on the surface of the globe now consciously connects with the source of life at the center and realizes without that he or she is nothing, and realizes that his or her true identity or beingness is that, not the form, the formless one life, because the center is one. The appearance of many is only on the surface, but every entity on the surface derives its life from the one at the center. It gets connected to that. So in a way the entire globe is an expression of the one expressing itself as the many. And the miracle of spiritual awakening is when the many, one of the seemingly many on the surface realizes his or her oneness. And then then that realization is there even while you become still aware of the surface reality. So as you look around you, there is a depth, and you're still aware of that spaciousness within you. You're still aware of the vastness, and you're still quite still. There's a stillness that is now part of your perceptions, and that stillness that is part of your perceptions is the depths of who you are. And from there you now see the world very differently, because when you now look around, yes, they are still separate bodies moving around you, but they are no longer totally other, because you can sense that they come from the same place. They are connected to the one in the center also. In other words, you recognize your own essence in other life forms. And that is a wonderful shift. It means other life forms are no longer perceived as threatening. There arises, for the first time, really, the ability to sense yourself into another life form, and this is called empathy, to feel the life in the other, to sense the life in the other as your own. And that is, in spiritual terminology, sometimes called love, and sometimes called benevolence, an outflow of goodwill towards other life forms. Other terms, loving kindness. Dalai Lama calls it kindness. Sounds a little superficial, but what he really means is something deeper. He said, my religion is kindness. He didn't say my religion is Buddhism. Because he knows the essence of all religions is taking you to that place. In most cases, they have failed to do that. They've done the opposite. Emphasized your separateness on the surface. To the point of complete insanity. Where you need to eliminate the other on the surface. So that is really, it's only now then that the sense of something missing in your life goes. And you can actually feel, for the first time, feel at home in the here and now. You don't have to be home. Even if you don't have a home, you feel at home where you are here and now, and not feel you're some kind of exile looking for your home. Home is a lovely word in English language. Whether or not it's accidental that it sounds like om, I don't know. Now the ancient philosophers, ancient Greece, they have a term which they talked about a lot, and they called it the good. There are long discussions, Socrates and others, what is the good? But nobody doubts that there is such a thing as the good, what they call the good. But it arises, what academics don't know who study ancient philosophy at universities, they don't realize that what they talk about has a foundation in the actual experience of certain philosophers like Socrates and pre-Socratics, and later ones like Plotinus and so on. They have a foundation. What they talk about has a foundation in what they directly knew. And they just try to convey in words what they directly knew. And again, it's a coincidence that in the English language, the good sounds very much like God. It's odd in some other Germanic languages also, they seem to be related, but that may be a coincidence, a lucky coincidence. But the good is knowing yourself as the one at the center, knowing your essence. That is the good, that is not the good that only exists because there is a bad, it's the good that is beyond good and bad. It transcends good and bad. It's the deeper good that is there even if on the surface reality dreadful things happen. And this cannot be denied, that on the surface reality things happen that we need to call, from the perspective of the surface reality, we need to call bad. We cannot say that these atrocities that humans commit are good. That would be absurd. So we need to say, to recognize on the surface reality, of course, you have good and bad. In the transcendent dimension, you have only good. That includes the bad. What does that mean? It means ultimately, but this needs to be a living realization. It is not something that I can tell you that you should believe. It means that ultimately the one life, everybody, every human being and life form is an expression of that one formless and timeless one life. And that is beyond anything that could be destroyed. It's life itself. It has no opposite. The one life has no, death is not the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth. And birth and death apply to the forms that appear on the surface of the sphere. So when death happens to life forms, even violent death, yes, it is from the perspective of the surface reality is dreadful, but from the perspective of knowing the transcendent dimension, even that is no longer dreadful. It is transcended because the realization is there. The life that you are and the life that I am can never be destroyed. The essence of every life form is eternal. It derives from the one. It's an expression of the one. to know that not just as a belief, but deep within yourself, to know that which cannot be destroyed, what the Buddhists call Amara, the deathless. This is the closest perhaps that the Buddhists come to talking about God. The deathless dimension, timeless, deathless, that which cannot be destroyed. Every human and every life form is a temporary expression of that. When you know that within yourself, you look with deep compassion upon the madness that happens on the surface reality, perpetrated by humans who don't know who they are. And because they don't know who they are, they don't know what they are doing to themselves, ultimately. Because every other is yourself. And that is, from the point of view of the surface reality, tragic, but from the transcendent dimension, the good and the bad, and even the so-called bad, seen from the transcendent dimension, which is not a belief, is seen as something that is part of the awakening in this dimension of the one life that is the transcendent. And this is as much as words can say about it, and even that perhaps is too much. So our task is to not to be seduced continuously and hypnotized by the surface reality. And everything, the surface reality is amplified these days by technology. A huge amplification of that, so it becomes even more seductive than it's been in the past. And one thing, everything demands your attention. Things that appear on computer screens and cell phones and beeping and noises and it all seems so significant. And another message is coming in. Something else to think about. So that our task is to direct attention to one could say, disentangle consciousness from its entanglement in form, its continuous identification with form. So consciousness is identified with form, the forms that arise in sensory perception and the mind forms. Ultimately, even sensory perceptions are mind forms, because all you ever experience is what goes on in your mind. Even this room goes on in your mind. That's where you experience. So this room becomes a mind form also. So ultimately, all forms are mind forms. You have no idea whether this room truly exists outside of your mind. You don't know whether this is a dream, that the mind is dreaming. You can't know that. Philosophers have discussed it for thousands of years. Am I dreaming this? In some ways, of course, it is like a dream. because it evaporates very quickly. And before you know it, this room is no longer there in your mind. It's evaporated. Was that a dream? We don't need to decide here and now whether this room, us, here, or wherever you are, here and now, you don't need to decide whether is it really real, or am I dreaming this? It comes to the same thing. Even if you're dreaming it, there must be a space or a light, whatever you want to call it, in which that dream appears and is known. There must be a knowing for the dream to be. There could be no dream without the knowing in which the dream appears. And that is the one thing that you cannot doubt. Everything else you can doubt. Descartes just didn't go deep enough. When Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, if he had waited a little, and if he had waited for a gap in the stream of thinking, he would have gone deeper into actual consciousness and realized, I'm conscious, therefore I am. So the one thing you cannot doubt is that you are. Whatever you experience, maybe a dream, and in many ways it is anyway. But the very foundation for the dream, whether we call this reality a dream or not, no longer matters. But the foundation is the consciousness behind it, without which it couldn't be. And there's no doubt that the beingness of you cannot question. It's obvious. The I am is obvious. The rest is dreamlike. So the obvious realization of I am is the very foundation of all life, not just your life. There's no such thing as your life, although I sometimes use that expression. There is not your life, because when you use that kind of language, but that's what language does, you separate yourself from life, and the illusion arises that you have life. That there's life something that you can have or lose. You are life, the one life. So language already seduces us into duality and into misperceiving reality. So as long as you know that, you can use it, but still know it's not quite true. So whenever I say your life, realize that I don't really mean that. Or I say my life. There's no such thing as my life. There's only life. So that, and of course, as you grow older, I used to say, you look at your old photo albums, but nowadays, people don't have them anymore. And the pictures don't get yellow anymore. I think they stay fresh and new on your computer or your iPad. But the years pass on the surface here, and then suddenly you realize, wow, this was taken 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. When was that? Oh, that was 50 years ago. There's something very dreamlike as you approach perhaps the end of your language, your life, which is the form identity. And then you look back and say, it is like a dream that is just you experienced, a long dream. And to some people it seems short, and some people might say, I'm tired of it, I don't want to dream anymore. And that's of course a good point to reach, to say, I'm tired of all that stuff. It's a good point to reach, and you don't have to be necessarily really old for that. a certain dissatisfaction with life, the limitations of the surface life,